Let's take a look at the Revolve tool now, and I'll start by creating a couple of wheels for the car. I've created a new layer for the wheels, so I'll turn off the other surface layers for now, but I'll bring back my outline wheels which I'll use for reference. So I want to revolve the wheel in this direction, so I'll need to draw the profile curves in this view. Now my outline wheels are in the right position, and I can snap to the geometry because it's in reference mode. So I'll start a curve in the middle here, and I can do that because my curve snap options are set to 2. And I've snapped in the 3D view because as I move into a 2D view I won't know if I'm snapping to the back one or the front one, and I definitely want the front one. So I'm just going to sketch in a tyre profile using the mouse constraints. And the tyre is not going to be manufactured from my curve, so I'll just do a rough shape. And to get the other half, I can do an edit duplicate mirror. And that's already set to the XZ plane. So I get my curve and I can just move that horizontally and point snap to the other one. I'll create a very simple shape for the main wheel. So I'll just stretch an edit point curve from there vertically down to the grid. And I can have fewer CVs, so I'll just rebuild that. And now when I give it some shape, I need to be careful to keep these two CVs vertical to each other, or 90 degrees to the revolve axis. And I'll show you why that's important later. So you can build some more interesting curve shapes, but I'm just going to stick with these simple profile curves and take a look at the revolve surface options. And at the top I've got mostly the same settings as I had with the circle tool. So I've got periodic or not, sweep angle, segments, degree and spans, etc. And I'll leave those as default for now. And down here I've got the axis options, and the first choice I've got is between local and global. So I'm going to start with global, which uses the grid origin as the position of the axis. And I want to revolve around the y-axis, so I'll choose Y here. And I don't need the control options. So up here it says select a curve to revolve. So I can just drag select my curves, and I get a wheel and tyre surfaces. Now, I have construction history as you'd expect. So if that tyre is a little bit chunky, I can come in this view and pick the CVs on the curves, and then just move them to create a lower profile tyre. And now I can show you the importance of the CV that's on the axis. If I move this away from being vertical with the second CV, you can see that it creates a peak or a trough in the surface. And that's why it's so important to keep those CVs in line with each other. Now if I want to move that wheel, I could try to pick the surfaces and do a move, but I get a message telling me that I'm going to remove the construction history. So I'll say yes for now and just move them. And you can see that the surfaces have gone blue. So moving them away from their controlling curves means that they lose the history connection. Now sometimes that's okay, but if I do want to keep the history, then I need to select the curves instead of the surface. And then if I move those, then the surfaces will follow. Now that works fine along the y-axis, which is the axis of revolution. But if I now move it in X, then I get a strange result, because it's still using the global origin as the axis. And that's because I used global mode. So if I use Query Edit now and go back into the control window, I can try switching to local mode. But I get an error message up here which says objects need to be grouped when I've got more than one curve if I want to use the local mode. But the front wheel's in the right place, so I'll leave that one there, and I'll just take a copy of the curves and I'll use them for the rear wheel. And I'll just put my outline wheels back on so that I can use them to get the curves in the right position, using a horizontal move and a curve snap. So these are obviously not on the global axis now, so I'll need to use the local mode instead, which uses the pivot points as the axis location. But as I've got 3 separate curves, it makes sense to group them first, and then set the pivot point to where I want the axis to be. And now if I use the Revolve tool in local mode, you can see that it's spun the curves around the pivot point. And this has added benefits, because if I now move the curves, and I need to pick the grouped node, not the individual curves, then the curves and the axis are moved together. And so my surfaces stay in the shape of the wheel that I intended. So finally, let's have a look at the surface structure. And we can see what's going on by displaying the CVs. So if you remember from the circle tool, non-periodic tends to give this extreme CV layout. So I could choose a periodic, or I could choose to have maybe 4 segments, which is probably going to give me the most accurate result. But it's more likely that I'm going to do a portion of the wheel and then duplicate it. So let's say 60 degrees for a 6-spoke wheel. And you notice these blue manipulators here. And I can just pick and drag those to interactively change the sweep angle. And there's one thing I can't do in the control window, which is to change the start point. So I can grab this and type in -30. And then grab this one and type in +30, which means I've got a nicely centered wedge ready for designing a spoke or a hole. So in the next video, I'll work with these manipulators a bit more and look at some of the other axis options in Revolve. And we'll look at finishing off a wheel design in the first of the workflow sections.